Liberated from the liberated Akashic. We liberating cause we got the records of eternal knowledge. Creating real long descended to a goddess. Manifest the metaphysical into a solid. Telling you the future because I am the prophet. Picking up the scepter from where we dropped it. Now the kingdom's here for good. And I am the goddess people call me Isaac's daughter. I am the greatest and my lineage has to offer. I am the light that blinds those in the darkness. I am the one who can ignite all the stars. We will carry on the torch of those that light, and we will raise the frequency up to the highest. We will usher in the legacy of Alpha. We will be the one the cosmos can be proud of. Right now, right now, right now, right now, right now, and the past is right now, right now, right now, right now, right now, and the present is right now, right now, right now, right now, right now, and we liberated right now, right now, right now, right now, right now, liberated Akashic. Everybody, welcome to Liberated Akashic Liberated Community Series. We're here again with part 2 of Divine Feminine and Divine Masculine. Last week we talked a little bit about what it means to be Divine Feminine, what it means to be Divine Masculine. And this week we're going to dig a little bit deeper into what it means to be wounded or toxic. Feminine and masculine. So we're going to talk a little bit about that.
Looking forward to the deep dive. Before we even get started, shout out to the Eco Center, the Eco Foundation for housing us.
Yes.
Happy to be here. Happy to be here. And you should be here too. And you will. Yes.
In due time. All right, so last week we talked a little bit about our objective. Jalil, would you like to run down our objective today?
Yep. So, today we are going to discuss and define divine attributes of the feminine and masculine energy, but also the attributes and those characteristics that make up the wounded feminine and masculine.
Yes.
And we are going to discuss the need to look at these characteristics, and just kind of going to dive into some definitions around what it means to be wounded. We're going to talk a little bit about toxic femininity, toxic masculinity, and before we close out, we're going to make sure that we leave you with some information on ways to
kind of cope,
and deal with the things that create that wounded feminine, that wounded masculine, and the trauma that surrounds it, and how to heal from it.
Yes. Thank you for improvising and working through my my typos.
We working through together.
All right.
We are working through together.
All right. So I'm going to ask this question: what creates or wounds the divine feminine and divine masculine?
Why don't you go ahead and start us off?
I feel like that's
ladies first.
Oh,
ladies
I appreciate it. Okay. I feel like the obvious answer here is trauma.
Yeah.
Cue Meek Mill music. You know what I'm saying? Okay.
Big words. Trauma.
Yes. Okay. So trauma creates wounds within the divine masculine and the divine feminine, and we're going to talk a little bit about what is trauma.
Yeah.
So
I know you have a definition, but I have it as well.
Yes, please go ahead.
So when we talk about trauma, in its most simplest terms, we are talking about an emotional response to a terrible event, like an accident, a natural disaster. Things happen at a young age, at an older age, when you're an adult, and immediately after the event, shock and denial are typical. Long-term reactions include unpredictable emotions, flashbacks, strained relationships, even physical symptoms like headaches, nausea, different physical responses to physical events and even emotional events.
Okay. So
did you want to expound on that at all?
No.
Okay.
I guess I can. So some traumatic events can they're sometimes very painful. Sometimes they're emotionally painful. Sometimes they're physically painful. Sometimes it could be something as obvious as abuse, and sometimes it can be something as not like totally not obvious, such as like, you know, an emotional abusive situation, or just kind of like being present in a moment of something that really raises those cortisol stress hormones. So if you're in a constant state of high stress, then that is what that can be considered a traumatic experience. So if there's something happening in your life that's raising your cortisol levels and making you feel stressed out, raising your blood pressure, then that's definitely that's traumatic. That can be considered trauma as well. Right. And a lot of us living in the hood, I'm sure we all know, being in high poverty, high stress, and a lot of other things that we're experiencing uniquely in our communities is traumatic in itself, just by being here. So we're all experiencing some level of trauma, even if it's not as obvious as someone coming up to you and harming you physically. We're experiencing trauma in a lot of levels.
It's interesting. I'm just recalling last week's podcast when the good brother Asim was in the building with us, and something we touched on at the end was related to trauma, which was a good segue to, you know, what we're talking about now. I think we were talking about like how we reach, you know, the young brothers and the young sisters that need this information, that need to understand what it means to be divine, who need to understand what trauma is, you know, and how to start looking at ways to cope, but even more so heal. Because one thing I'm realizing in my life is and we'll get into this, but and not to jump too far ahead, but there are traumas in my own family that haven't been addressed all the way up until me, you know, and I'm a father now, and it's my duty as a father, as the head of my household, as a husband, to look at those traumas that don't just affect me, that affect my family line, and start to put a stop to it. So I'm sitting here thinking like, you know, we're talking about trauma, we're talking about divine, and why these things are important. And I'm like in real time right now, I'm getting answers, you know, to why.
Yes. So, okay. So, all right. The next thing we're going to talk about is a little bit about like, so we already said what is trauma. We can also talk about what makes something traumatic. So we already kind of talked about that, about those stress hormones, raising those cortisol levels. But just to go with the definition here, any event that involves experiencing or witnessing actual threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence. Let's see, or has the potential it has the potential to be traumatic. Almost everyone who experiences trauma will be emotionally affected, and there are many different ways in which people will respond. So, all right, so we're going to talk about a little bit moving forward. We're going to talk about what does it look like to be a like wounded feminine, wounded masculine. Like, what does that look like, and what are those effects? How are they coming up?
Can and how they're related to trauma. So, did you want me to hop into it, or how you feeling? You want to jump?
Yeah, you can go ahead. All
right, put your seatbelts on, y'all. We about to take a wild ride. Just kidding. Sorry. Just wanted to lighten the mood up a little bit.
It's all good because this is heavy stuff here.
But nah, let's really buckle in, because I think this is something that that we're going to talk about in this episode, this is a conversation that we really need to start looking at on a larger scale. So when we talk about the wounded divine masculine, because what we're going to do is we're going to identify as divine.
Oh, you are?
Yeah, just so we can. That's what we need to work on. I think one thing we also said last podcast is, when we're talking about developing those qualities and those attributes that make you divine, I think it all starts here. It starts in the mind. So if you can still be wounded, you know, just like on the battlefield, if you fighting and get sliced or something happens to you, sliced,
you're still a warrior.
You're still a warrior, and you still got to get up and continue to fight. So.
Wonderful. Yeah. I really like how you frame that.
I appreciate you. I appreciate you 100%.
I like it.
So that wounded divine who is still working on themselves, we look at some definitions and some words to describe as
some attributes
or characteristics as anxious, that wears the pants. So last week we talked about a humble assertiveness. This person is bossy. They're like, nah, my word is my word, and that's it. Authoritarian, bully, abusive physically, mentally, and emotionally, angry, hateful, resentful, overly competitive, prone to violence, avoidance, controlling, and closed-minded. So those are some of the words that we look at when we're trying to describe a wounded divine masculine.
Okay, and to talk about the wounded divine feminine, we're going to talk about depressive, dwells in emotions, insecure, obsessive, materialistic, plays the victim role, needy, delusional, disconnected from reality, escapist, manipulative, opportunistic, very overly passive, perfectionist, holds grudges, and is jealous. There's also a few other ones that I feel like were, just kind of something else that kind of resonates.
Yeah, drop those, and I got a few more as well to drop too.
So, wounded divine feminine is often repressing her truth, feels unworthy, dwells in a lot of shame and guilt, has weak boundaries, is codependent, always apologizing, and over-explaining.
Okay.
So, and a few others I want to add, and we can, ping pong. You can add absolutely. A few more if you want to. These are some other ones that kind of resonated. Wounded divine feminine has low self-worth, is afraid to speak her truth once again, compromises her integrity and values, is easily attached. We said manipulative and stuck in victimhood. We said that already, and waiting to be saved. And just drowning in her own emotions. Let's see. I think those are pretty much it that I wanted to say.
Yeah. And I'm sure the list can.
It goes on.
It go on and on and on.
These
are just
there's a few more. People pleasing, feels powerless, confused, validation seeking, desperate, fears being abandoned, unworthy. Once again. Shame, guilt, and struggle saying no. That's those weak boundaries.
Yeah.
So I think the ones that really kind of resonate are just kind of like repressing one's truth. That I feel like is a sign of a wounded divine feminine. Also weak boundaries, unable or unwilling to create and set up boundaries for themselves. And also, what's another one? Just kind of like dwelling in shame and guilt and feeling unworthy. And I feel like these wounds and these attributes, they show up in our community often. And I feel like that resonates with a lot of us, even me. So I mean, at some point in time in my life, I would like to think that I'm moving towards elevating myself and moving into healthier ways of being. But I'm not perfect, and neither is anybody else in this room or anyone else listening to this podcast. We're not perfect, and I think if we can just kind of recognize these things and know what's going on and know that that's a wounded divine feminine or wounded divine masculine attribute, then we can work on it and continue to be conscious of it when we see it out in the community, so that we can react with empathy and compassion. Yeah,
and I know we're dropping like a lot of these terms, and we're dropping this information, and just so that we can cover a wide scale of, ideas, so that people can begin to define what attributes or characteristics in them might make them wounded, so that they can identify it and start to heal from it. Some of the other definitions, I don't know if you have
some of the other attributes. No,
of the wounded divine masculine that also resonated with me in looking at this information was someone that's forceful. That's dominating, that's manipulative, overthinking, overdoing, controlling, and demanding. I have a few more, but one thing I'm realizing about some of these definitions, when you think about the divine masculine, it's really rooted, even the divine feminine, it's rooted in power And when you look at the wounded divine, for the masculine, that power being abused is like something that comes up a lot. We see it in our homes, and we see it in the community.
Hopefully
not in our home, but
hopefully not in nobody else's home.
Yeah,
but,
for sure. I've had the opportunity, a beautiful opportunity, for a few years. I'm gonna say about 5, to work in high schools under the Sankofa Passages program. And one thing that was so unfortunate in working with some of the young men was that a lot of them were dealing with trying to understand what like true divine power was, because the examples that they had were what we're seeing a wounded divine masculine would portray. So also the lack of trust,
so some
overachieving, and just kind of closed off. And I think, like I said, the ones that really resonated with me that I feel really need to be checked when that wounded divine masculine is trying to find healing would be like just that abuse. That's something that just kind of comes up a lot in when I'm looking up what it means to be wounded.
So sometimes when, everybody experiences abuse in a different way. So a lot of times when these wounds come about, people are responding. The divine feminine responds to abuse in such a way. Often it looks like victimhood, a loss of power, feeling powerless, and just kind of like shame, like just kind of like turns inward. But when the divine masculine experiences abuse, he kind of like sends it back out. It's an anger. It's a sending out the energy. So it's the the overexertion of power, and that overexertion of sometimes repeating that cycle of abuse and perpetrating the abuse on their own. And that's how we sometimes see it show up. So abuse affects us all, but it affects us all in a different way.
Absolutely.
All right, so we're going to dive into the timeline of traumatic experiences. So one thing that I think it is important to note is that our DNA is a powerful indicator of who you are, who you will be, and who you have been. When people are saying, I honor my ancestors, you're honoring yourself when you're honoring your ancestors. And you're honoring yourself when you're honoring your ancestors, because all of the genetic information is stored right in your DNA. Everything that they've been through, everything that they've done, everything that has happened to them is encoded in your DNA. And I think we don't give enough respect, honor, and word to the fact that our DNA and our genetic code has all of that information in it. So we want to start at the very beginning. We're going to start from conception. From conception, we are already loaded with, traumas or bliss that have been passed down and given to us and gifted to us in the nice, neat package that is our genetic code.
Can you break that down a little bit about what you mean?
So, if your great-grandma was a drug addict and been through a lot of trauma and a whole bunch of other stuff, that just might be in your genetic code, that she's been through trauma, because once again, those cortisol levels, those stress levels, that stuff gets stored in your body, and it affects your DNA and affects your genetic code and its ability to express the listen, I'm not a science teacher here, so I'm trying to say it in the way that I've gathered the information and understood it. But your DNA, it has a job, and it expresses itself over and over again, and replicates and helps your body to do what it does. Absolutely. And when you're dealing with stress, and trauma, your DNA, your body is unable to do what it's supposed to do. Yeah. And that shows up in your body, in your health, in so many different things, in your mental health, everything. There's a genetic component to all of that. Absolutely. So when you are created, sometimes some of us are created with that disadvantage of having trauma stored in your... Sit back a little bit, please. Some of us are, or just move this over a little bit. You blacking me?
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay. Thank you. So some of us have that disadvantage of being, of having our genetic code be, just kind of have that trauma already stored in it.
Yeah, for sure.
So that part, that's a little bit challenging. It helps to know your family. It helps to know your family history. So that way you know how you can combat the trauma that might be encoded in your DNA.
For sure.
We hope that, you know, your family have found ways to heal from the trauma that, you know, they've experienced in the past, because, you know, you have that power to heal and transform your own DNA, your own body.
Absolutely.
All the time. I'm losing what the term is called, but it's kind of, I think it's called, let's see.
What term what you thinking of?
There's so it's kind of like genetic deletion or something like that, where you can turn on or off codes in your own DNA that can happen.
We could talk a little bit more about that. That's one thing that we're going to make sure we do with this podcast is we're going to provide information. So if you're clicking the link, if you're watching on YouTube, if you're watching on our website, we'll make sure to
give y'all
drop some links with some more information for sure.
Some sources, some resources.
And I think just based off of our own personal practices and studies, one thing we talk about a lot with our business, one thing we talk about a lot with our children, one thing we discuss with each other, we speak on just the power of the metaphysical and like energy. So one thing I'm thinking of when I hear you talk about passing down of genetic information, you'll probably hear all the time like, oh, you look just like your daddy, you know, you look just like your grandmom, or you look just like your great grandpa Charles or something. And you know, we see over time, like as children grow, you do begin to look like these people, and sometimes you'll even begin to express some of the same actions, like, oh yeah, your laugh sounds just like your dad. And sometimes that's situational. You know, you be around your dad, you hear your dad laugh, you laugh with your dad, you start laughing like your dad. You know what I mean? But also, there are certain, just like it's literally passed down in the genetic coding of your body, that energy, you know, is also passed down. We know energy is constant. Brother Asim said last week, you know, energy, and one of his points that he was making, energy is never created, it never dies, it's just here, and it's been here. So when we are birthed, you know, through our mothers, we're taking on also that energy that comes along with, you know.
So you moving along the timeline. So from the conception, you know, we got that. We got some trauma that might be already encoded in your genetic, in your makeup. And once you're in that incubation period of the pregnancy that you're experiencing with your parent and parents, depending on who's around you, you could experience trauma in the womb. Some mothers are going through maybe an undesired or unwanted pregnancy, going through mental health, going through poverty, going through a lot of issues. Sometimes they're experiencing abuse, and one of the first organs, if I'm not mistaken, of course, it's the heart and the brain that develop first, but also it is the sound, once conception happens, there's a beating of the heart. So there's sound and there's vibration. Frequency. So if your parent is experiencing trauma, you're not just a rock in the womb until you're born. You are a malleable, vibrating being that is experiencing whatever your parent is experiencing, whatever the person who's incubating you and carrying you is experiencing. You'll be experiencing that as well. To talk about it on a physical level, if your mother is eating hot Cheetos while she's pregnant with you, you taste it. You have taste buds. When we are in the womb, we're experiencing what it is that our parent is experiencing. So if she's going through trauma, or if that person that's carrying you as a child when you're in pregnancy and gestation period, if they're experiencing trauma, then you too are experiencing trauma. Then we move on to birth. Birth is a tough experience. We've all been born, so I'm sure we all know that. I mean, you might not know, but birth is a tough experience. It can be tough. It can be blissful. It can be great. I know so many women who have had blissful births, and that is wonderful for them, and it is wonderful for their family, and it is wonderful for their children, because that is so important. But I also know a lot of people who are experiencing traumatic births, and it is traumatic for the parent who is still connected to the child. So if the parent is experiencing trauma throughout the process of birthing the child, then the child who is being born is also experiencing trauma along with the parent who is doing the birthing. And the experience itself can be traumatic for the child. You go through a canal, you might get stuck, you might take too long, there might be some things happening to you, you might accidentally get poked or prodded, and then once you make it into the other side, it might be too cold, too hot, too this, too that. There's a lot of things that happen once a person is born.
Right.
So there can be some trauma there. Some people do have birth trauma, and people are talking about that more often now.
Yeah, and I know one thing I'm realizing about trauma, just like I was saying through my experiences of working with schools and how I'm relating, speaking of trauma through like the rite of passage experience. You know, in the beginning of it, there is trauma. You're pulled away from something. There's a natural trauma that occurs, and it's not always bad, but you know, that trauma sometimes is unavoidable. You know, so when you're talking about birth, even with, I'm sure, beautiful natural home births, there's still that passing through the canal, and the baby comes out well and healthy, but it's that journey. You know, that journey is always unpredictable.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
For certain. So, okay, so we've moved through 3 different stages, and this is when we're making it to the date of birth, where you can have 3 different setups for, you know, for creating some trauma wounds or not. So, you know, moving forward, we're going to talk about a little bit early childhood. This one is a little tough because there are some traumas that are completely unavoidable. And when we talk about trauma here, I want to talk specifically about situations and experiences that induce pain, fear, and anxiety within a person.
And we're going to talk about, you know, these are our opinions based off of what we find in research.
So, all right, we've got picking back up from where we left off. We're talking about trauma and what that looks like. We're talking about the timeline of traumatic experiences. So when we're talking about early childhood, there's a few different traumatic experiences that occur, whether it is hopefully not, but we're talking about abuse. We're talking about separation and family, family dynamics when sometimes parents separate or move or things like that. Some of these things can be traumatic experiences. Also, depending on your parenting style, we can have, discipline such as spankings and whatnot. Those can be traumatic experiences. And while some people totally agree that healthcare is necessary and they agree with all forms of healthcare, no matter what that looks like, some healthcare experiences can be very traumatic to children. So some children, if we go back a little bit to birth, sometimes children are born in need of medicines, in need of life-saving,
special attention, special care,
special needs.
Speaking about, that birthing process is traumatic naturally, and I'm sure you can attest, but a woman's body can, create a traumatic space, but also just that birthing process being in the hospital.
Well, I'm talking about the children. So, like the children, if they're needing help and whatever, like if they're needing medicine or things like that, maybe a child might need some, sometimes premature children might need to have tubes, feeding tube, breathing tubes. Those things can be a bit traumatic to children. Sometimes children are in need of medicines, medication, and other things to be inserted into their body intravenously. Sometimes that can be traumatic because it's painful. Nobody likes to get needles. And speaking of needles, some children also, go through getting their vaccines on a routine basis, which most people do. That can be a traumatic experience, especially to a child who, doesn't want it, or they just
can't even voice, that they don't want it.
Yeah,
For
so
sure.
that can be a traumatic experience. And this is not a podcast to say one side or another, but
yeah,
just we want to
and
acknowledge that certain experiences can be
sure.
traumatic for certain people. And also, if we're talking more about the early childhood age, some children experience other surgeries that are sometimes necessary, sometimes cultural, such as circumcision and other surgeries that might need to happen. And those, if the experience is painful, if the experience causes some type of pain before, after, or during, then pretty much that can be classified as trauma or traumatic. Moving forward to if we can go all the way to the rest of our community, like to our living experience, what are some other traumas you feel like some people experience in their life from, elementary school up?
I was saying this earlier, I think the cameras were, cutting off, but for this podcast, one thing I really want to make sure, and just like all podcasts, we all are going to have our opinions and we're entitled to our opinions. But the one challenge I want to make sure we put out there for everybody is to research. Don't just take our word for it, and don't just take anyone's word for it, whether they be a healthcare professional, your doula. Always trust, number one, yourself. And when you begin to trust yourself and know what it is that information is before you, that is real, that is based off of research and numbers, then as you have these conversations about, things that are suggested for you to do, just as a way to start thinking of stopping the trauma in its tracks or healing from trauma, ask those questions. Don't just blindly accept information that's given to you. Always research, always dive in and dig in. We are speaking.
I would like to add a little bit to that. And even when you're researching, because it's a little, research can also be kind of, it can be flawed depending on where you're getting, where your sources, where you're getting it from. So definitely look at it from the logical perspective of definitely researching, but also look into it from the the heart as well, like what feels right, and
if it's creating trauma, then
if you feel like it's traumatic for your family, for your child, then and it doesn't feel right, then it's probably not right.
A note to what Natasha was saying, like, search in here. Our ancestors and this entire planet, we've been living and we've been doing what we've been doing for years, and a lot of the answers aren't going to be external. They're going to be internal, because that's where they got the information from to live and survive, and generations down the line create us and find ourselves here. So when we look at trauma from that early childhood going into those toddler years and going into school, one thing I can note, just to kind of push along, is that the trauma of separation. A child who is now, you've been home with your parents, from a baby, learning how to walk, all of these beautiful experiences, and unfortunately, because of how society is set up and people got to work and we got to pay bills, now you got to go to school, and you are forced out of your comfort zone. You're forced out of being home with your mom, your dad, your mama, your baba. You're forced from leaving grandmom sometimes, and now you're in a new setting, a new environment where it's like, yo, what is this? Where am I? And there's a new person that's supposed to be caring for you who you don't know them. There are new people around you who are your peers. You don't know them, who are all coming from their own experiences. And now you're in a new place and you have to experience and hopefully survive, this new setting.
That can definitely be traumatic. As a person who has worked in early childhood, worked in schools, I've seen how, Some children respond to being separated.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a crying that happens for a week. Over time, it's like, oh, they're gonna eventually get used to it. Baby's crying every single day. As soon as the baby get dropped off, he's crying. As soon as the baby get picked up, they've been crying all day. And then it's like, oh, they'll get used to it. They'll get used to it. They'll get used to it. So that's definitely one that I didn't even think about just because it's been so normalized.
Yeah.
And there's so many more. We could go into so many different places where trauma shows up. And we want to keep this at a certain time frame.
Right.
So
I think y'all are getting
what we're talking about.
Picking up what we putting down.
And we'll talk a little bit more about our personal lives if you want us to on a different podcast about how we try to eliminate trauma from our situation.
For sure.
But definitely this podcast, my intention is to be unbiased and just present you with where trauma comes from and how it shows up. So we talked a little bit about the timeline of trauma, and this is just from early childhood all the way up. And the reason why I wanted to talk about these traumas today specifically is because if you get all the way up to adulthood and you haven't addressed and checked and dealt with your childhood traumas, you're not thinking about them because you're thinking about your high school traumas. You're thinking about your college traumas.
Right.
You're thinking about your adult traumas, and it doesn't even occur to you that, hey, you've been dealing with trauma after trauma for some time now, and now you're moving in such a way that you don't even realize that you've compounded traumas on top of traumas, and that you're wounded. Some of these wounded attributes, some of these wounded divine traits are showing up in your personality, and you don't even realize that you can't even distinguish that which is an effect of trauma from what is actually your core personality and who you want to be. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that today because it's easy to talk about, like, hey, yeah, I've been through trauma. My boyfriend beat me up. Yeah, that's trauma. Or, hey,
I've been through trauma. My girl cheated on me, man. She's wild, crazy.
You know what I'm saying? It's easy to talk about those traumas because we can see those traumas and we can tell with each other, like, hey, I see you going through trauma. But there's so many of us who've been through so much trauma for so long that we are not even cognizant of how it is affecting us. So definitely, that's how it goes on. Everybody at some point probably experienced some trauma, and some of us have experienced trauma more than others. And I just want to say, we are resilient beings.
That's it.
We are resilient beyond measure. And we are able to transform and transmute that trauma into healing and love and light and be whole people, no matter what experiences we have been through, no matter what trauma we've experienced. And we will continue to do that. But I just want us to know that it is important to identify this trauma so that we don't continue to perpetuate it, number one, but also we know how to combat the effects of these traumas upon our bodies, upon our health, upon our mental, upon our spirit, so that we can be more divine beings.
Absolutely. And that's it.
Okay, so we're moving along. We're going to have a little Q&A toward the end. But we're going to move a little bit. We got one or two more things to talk about before we get there. You ready? You need to say something at this time?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I just highlighting on what you were saying. I just want to continue to reiterate that we are throwing out all of these terms not to like break anybody down, but we all really need to be aware, because I think the wounded divine being is just rooted in unawareness. That fear is really based on, I just don't know. I don't know what might happen. I don't know where this comes from. That hate is, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to overcome this. But when we have the time to identify and really sit with what it is that's causing us to be wounded, that's causing us to feel the effects of these traumas, both identified and the ones that we, haven't thought about, but that we're talking about, it starts to create a roadmap on how to navigate and step into healing from that trauma. So listen to these terms, research these terms, research yourself, look inward, and as you do begin to identify these things, don't let it weigh you down, because you are divine. let it be that first step into, you know, walking into light, the light that you are, the divine being that you are.
Yes. So, all right, last week we talked a little bit about what it means to be a divine being. And we were talking about a divine being, whether masculine, feminine, they're a healthy, balanced human of integrity, power, wisdom, and love. And a wounded person, a wounded human, is a sick, fearful, passive person of anger, greed, pride, and hate. So we want to move forward. And lastly, what's the last thing? We want to talk about coping and healing. But is there anything else that you wanted to add before we get to that part?
Nah. You did a good job covering a lot of the things that I had on my mind to say. Definitely.
Okay.
On that Gemini time.
Yes. Okay.
Speaking all the words.
Thank you. So, all right, we want to talk about how to cope and deal with trauma. If you're feeling triggered, if anybody's feeling triggered today, I hope that you will seek support. And we have a few resources. I'm sure all of us know to utilize, but we're going to add a few other ones.
Yeah, we'll drop some in the links.
Yeah.
But let's talk about this.
Okay.
We got some beautiful people here with us today.
Yes, want to ask
that might have questions that we might ask questions to, or that might want to give input as well. So let's get into it. So how about we go back and forth? We have a nice list here, and we can work together to both express these beautiful things that you can use, these beautiful tactics to
how
combat.
to cope with triggered trauma memories. Okay, so let's go. You first.
Sure. So number one that we have here of the many resources and tools that you can use is move your body. Do a little dance, you know, get a little let me pass it to you. Okay. You know, getting your body moving, it helps to release endorphins and shift your body's response. So like even in that traumatic experience where you are just trying to figure out like what can I do? Throw some music on, your favorite song, throw something hype on that won't cause too much more trauma. But you know, just shake it off. You know, shake it off. Let it flow through you and create that happiness.
That's the only thing we're about to tell you to do. Like, oh yeah, you've been through trauma, just dance. Like, no, there's more. Nah. There's a long list here.
You know,
we're moving on. Okay. So, all right, the next one: use grounding techniques. Bring yourself into the present by getting in touch with your senses, and I feel like that is a really helpful tool. Getting grounded. So lately, my son has been having some serious tantrums. He's been going off, and a few times that he's been doing, he's been going through some of that. He's been going through some of his, you know, hard times. Sometimes I'll just pick him up, hold him like this, and say, "Let's take a deep breath and breathe really loud in his ear so he can hear me." Let's take a deep breath. And just give him something to feel, hear, you know.
Okay.
All of that
stuff. He be showing off for mommy.
Listen, it takes a little while, you know.
I believe it.
But definitely, I feel like that's helpful. And I mean, I can't necessarily say not getting your way is a traumatic experience.
Nah,
but you know, that's to help
breathing.
Him through through what he's gone through, to help to give him some tools, hopefully, to be used in the future when he's having a hard time. If he even has a hard time.
That's a great grounding technique. I use that one myself on the daily.
Okay, what's the next one?
So, go outside.
Period.
Go outside.
Period.
This is a great place to apply the grounding techniques.
Yes.
Breathe in the fresh air.
I
was on a gram the other day, and it was a girl who went outside when it was raining, and she laid in the grass and let the water just cleanse away whatever she was dealing with.
Yes.
I will try that one day.
One day. Okay.
I don't think I'm gonna go outside and lay on the ground. It's glass there.
No, it's not.
But I'll sweep the glass.
We've been cleaning.
Nah, I'm just kidding, you know.
All right.
What else we got?
Practice cozy self-care. That's my favorite. Draw a warm bath and go to Liberated Akashic and buy some ritual baths from me personally. Go to natashadivine.com because I got all kinds of stuff for the bath, baby. Because that's my favorite one. Get in your bath and then put on your comfiest pajamas. Yes, period. That's my favorite.
Was that it?
Yeah.
Okay. I was gonna say something, but that might be inappropriate. So, Let emotions be. Let those emotions flow. Allow yourself to process the emotions with patience. That's one thing that I am working on. I think one thing, especially when it comes to trauma and trauma responses, I've seen in myself, and I've seen in some of my brothers, some of my sisters, that the response is to just like, yo, get over it. Get over it. You got to let it go. Like, ain't nothing to cry about. Nah, you have to let that emotion be and let it flow in order for that to get out of you. And in order for you to be able to identify, like, all right, what's really going on? You know, if you let the emotions flow, you can properly identify what it might be. It could be anger. It could be disappointment. But if you try to stop it, you'll never be able to identify it. And if it comes up again, you're just repeating and perpetuating that cycle just in yourself.
This is
let
so
alone
important.
What you might be passing on to those around you, to your children if you have children. When you step into contact with your friends and family, you're carrying those things energetically. You're carrying those emotions energetically because it's energy.
Yes.
And but if you let it flow,
yeah,
you can, let it flow.
And if you don't let it flow, it's called an incomplete emotion. And when you have an incomplete emotion, that means an emotion that you haven't like completely felt and expressed and dealt with, then it actually affects you on a physical level.
Yeah.
Turns into illness and a whole bunch of other stuff. If you need more information, you can read the Subtle Body Encyclopedia. They give you all the information in there.
And the Subtle Body workbook.
Yeah.
That's a good tool to have with it.
Definitely.
We'll drop that link.
Yeah. So anyway, so we're definitely thank you for all of the resources. So definitely feeling those emotions, that's something I feel like I've gotten really good at. And I like to talk to people about this all the time. It's the conference room inside my head. And I just kind of check in with my emotions, check in with the various versions of myself, and give them an opportunity to speak. You know, and when I say give them an opportunity to speak, like, hey, if there's an angry me somewhere in my head right now, what are you angry about? I'm angry because something, the backyard is like this, and the neighbors are doing this, and they're doing that, and this is what's happening, and I'm really angry about that. Your emotions are valid. Period. And that's complete. Then you can move forward. You know, sometimes we don't want to judge our feelings. Sometimes we do judge our feelings, and that is what causes us a lot of problems, a lot of hardships, because it's like, oh, I shouldn't feel this, I shouldn't feel that, I shouldn't feel anger, I shouldn't feel sadness over this that happened. Like, no, I shouldn't even feel that. Like, don't judge your emotions. Just feel them, experience them, and let them know, hey, you're valid. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes people like to call their feelings or their emotions or what they're going through, they like to say, oh yeah, like my demons in the closet. Oh yeah, my demons, I can stay away from my demons. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I used to joke and say, like, oh, I take my demons to the bar for a drink and ask them what's going on with them and talk to them. And that's like, it's silly. I don't really want to hang with no demons. But it's like, if there's something that's bothering you so badly, then it's a reason. And it's like, you know, if you have a demon or something like that, it's like, well, what they want? What's going on? You know, like, hey, what's up with you? Like, here, take a little drink. You want some water? What's up with you? What's the matter? And then you'll find out, like, well, I'm really mad because I wanted to do this and it didn't work out in my favor. And it's like, your emotions are valid.
That's deep.
Demon.
That's
but
deep.
It's not really a demon. But you know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? Your emotions are valid.
And that's real, because if you don't give them a voice, you know, to figure out what's going on, they'll start to speak for you. And if that demon speaking for you, that's gonna come out in a way, you know, that might not be the most healthy.
You know what I'm saying? That's that lower self, higher self. That lower self, if you want to, you know, oh, my demon,
voice,
my goddess, whatever. They friends.
Let them talk.
They are friends.
They helping you figure this thing out together.
Your lower self, your higher self, they're friends. They work together, and you gotta be able to give them both voice, so that you can be a whole person.
That's it. All right, let's go on. You got the next one. I know you kind of.
Oh, my bad. I kind of took over. Okay. The Let Emotions Be was so good. It says try tapping. Tapping calms anxiety, builds self-acceptance, and draws your answers and draws your awareness into your senses. Yes.
It's called stimming. People with autism do it where you self-stimulate.
Yes, yes.
Appreciate
Thank
that.
you for
Yep.
that. There you go. I didn't even realize that
Yep.
that connection. I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
So I know some people do it out of, you know, like you said, for stimming, but some people I was taught by an elder to do tapping you know, on the onset or the beginning of a meditation, and just kind of like tap different parts, your different meridians on your body, and kind of like say your affirmations, and just keep on saying your affirmations, and just tap in the different parts of the body in this way. And while, you know, when I first learned it, I'm like, oh, that's really crazy. Like, what are y'all doing? Like, why are you tapping all of this? What are you doing?
Right,
This doesn't make any sense. But after a while, you know, I'm like, okay, I trust the elder. And now I'm reading, I'm finding more information out. I'm like, oh, it makes sense, you know.
Yeah, and it's
trusting your elders sometimes really, you know.
Oh, absolutely. Trust those, especially those healthy elders.
Yes.
I think along with the tapping and stemming, when we, in the beginning of this podcast, we were talking about where some of that trauma resides. So I can only imagine if somebody has that trauma somewhere in their body that tenses up when they're reminded of it, you help that energy to flow, especially when you're hitting them meridians, because you are allowing not just in your mind, you know, those affirmations to flow and the realization of what's happening in your own bodies to flow, but you're able to move it, you know, move it away, move it out, so that it can, so you can let that emotion flow, let that energy flow. And
lastly,
last but definitely not least, and definitely not the last, but last for this list. Get support.
Period.
Having a sense of community, period, is essential to avoid falling prey to isolation, which can come up a lot when people are dealing with trauma, people are dealing with wounds, when that woundedness and you on your journey to being a divine being takes over. Seek out people that you trust, people that you love, you know, a phone call, a text, and I think even to be proactive, one thing I'm learning is to create the community around you, even in the good moments, so that when those hard moments come up, you already got people that you know you can just, yo, bro, I'm not okay right now, you know, I'm not feeling well, or hey sis, like I need to talk, like here go the tea, here go everything, and I just need to spill it. And
also, I want you to also know that sometimes building your community around you is not just friends that you can dump on when you're going through a traumatic experience. Sometimes that community needs to have your therapist, a real therapist, real one, because I know some of y'all don't want to go to a therapist. You need to see a therapist. I'm serious. You really do. And that needs to be a part of your community. A licensed, real therapist that can help you, give you the tools that you need, because it's one thing to just dump all of your emotions and what you're going through, your traumas, on your friends, who sometimes they got their own stuff going on too. But you need to make sure that you're putting it somewhere that is safe to put it, and it's also going to give you, it's going to be transmuted and changed. So make sure that when we're saying have your community, that a therapist is a part of that community. Also, make sure that you have your supportive resources, and depending on what you're going through, you need to know where else those supportive resources are. So if you're a person who's experiencing trauma in the form of abuse or something like that, you need to know that there are tools and resources for you in the community, waiting for you, ready to help you to get to the next step of your healing and the best part of your life that you are trying to step into. And another one that is a part of the community that I would like to say for myself, I like to listen to my affirmations on YouTube. Not my personal affirmations, but I like to listen to affirmations on YouTube, especially if I'm feeling triggered, if I'm feeling like I'm going through trauma in a moment. I have to go. I can't call my therapist in the middle of the night sometimes, you know, and then, you know, you don't want to call it. Sometimes, like, if you're not going through a crisis of feeling suicidal, you don't want to call a suicide hotline in the middle of the night. So, and you don't want to call your friends in the middle of the night. So if you're feeling like you're going through trauma in the middle of the night or something like that, what is something that you can do to help bring you back? And for me, is turn on those affirmations of, affirmations for healing trauma, affirmations for healing traumatic experiences, affirmations for feeling love and abundance. And that's what I do to help bring me back, because sometimes even myself, I go through moments of trauma
for sure
and traumatic memories.
And just some things that aren't listed that I'll just run through real quick. But that movement, like just touching back on some of the things we started talking about, movement isn't just dance, but stretch, you know. And sometimes that stress is caused by tightness in the body from trauma that hasn't been dealt with, from wounds that haven't been dealt with. So if you just continue to keep it in and sink inward and never release, you know, do a little bit of yoga. It don't have to look how, you know, as pretty as it look in the books or people doing it on the gram. Just move your body in a way that will be relaxing and comfortable. Stretch your arms, stretch your legs, take deep breaths, and just kind of release, you know, release. That's some great ways and great tools to be proactive, because even doing it before the trauma arrives gives you the tools and the freedom to, you know how to address it and to know how to identify when it's coming up. Because if you start to tense up and you're like, yo, I've been stretching, what's going on? You can identify like, all right, it's not just me feeling tight from work. This is me feeling tight from what's going on in my heart and what's going on in my mind.
Yes.
So,
right.
yeah, that's what we got, and we'll drop some links. We'll have more to talk about, but before we get out of here, we got some beautiful people in the house.
Yeah, we do.
Okay.
So I am Asim Farouk, and this is the subtle but beautiful Sanaya. Subtle but bold, subtle and bold, I want to say. And do you want to start? I can start. So whatever.
I guess I'll start.
This list was just digging.
Let's go.
Yeah, it's a chicken wing, and I got a whole joint in my. No, I was like, but you could go.
I guess. Well, first I want to say that was beautiful.
Thank
I love hearing y'all talk about it, because it definitely is something that most people, if not everyone, goes through, that most people don't know how to deal with, or they're learning how to deal with in their adult years. I did do a college paper on early childhood trauma and how it affects development. But I guess my first question would be, do you think that DNA has any effect on generational trauma?
Can you before you got? Can you like go deeper into like what that question like really into?
So you guys were talking about DNA and genetics and how, you know, you are your ancestors because of that DNA. And I just thought about generational trauma and how people, you know, generation after generation, we hear about generational trauma and how families kind of go through the same things but don't know how to deal with it. And it got me thinking, like, is that just because of like family, or is it because of our literal DNA? So yeah.
I think that it's a little bit of both, and we always, you know, anybody who's in the field of education, you know, we always talk nature versus nurture. So there's always there's an element of both in everything, but definitely nature a lot of times does win, and it can be that some of this stuff is encoded in your DNA. So talking about generational traumas, like one of the things within certain families, you have a parent who, or a grandparent who might have been on drugs or been through a certain trauma. It goes down the line, and everybody has that information. So sometimes somebody might be, you know, addicted to drugs here, not addicted here, but then it's here and here, and it's like, well, why? And it's like, well, that's in the DNA. Like it's there. That information is there.
Yeah.
And also, sometimes we don't always consider is that, especially women, we hold our children and we hold our grandchildren in our womb. So it like women are born with all of their eggs that they're going to have for their whole life. And when they conceive a daughter, then their daughter is creating her body, and as her body creates and is becoming created, then her ovaries are created as well, and she is then having her eggs in here. So it's her eggs, then it's your baby, and then it's you. So all three of y'all are going through something to get y'all have a deep bond together in a very physical way. Yeah. But, you know, on a metaphysical level, everybody's experiencing that to some degree, that symbiotic, or what's the word I'm looking for, that connection, with the intergenerational connection.
Yeah.
So I think definitely DNA.
Yeah, and I agree on it being both. I'm just recalling situations in my own family where, and this, I'll make it as simple and as short as possible, but if you have someone who might deal with a certain type of trauma or be the one who is exemplifying that traumatic experience or creating that traumatic experience. And everybody in that household experiences it, and no one like tries to deal with it or heal from it. And then as you leave that household and create your own household, you're just taking it with you. You take it with you. I'm always yelling at you. I'm yelling at you to create this, make you understand, and I'm yelling at you because I want you to be well. And then that child gathers like, all right, so if I want my children to be well, if I want them to understand, I have to yell at them in order for them to get it. And because no one told them that there's another way to deal with, teaching, there's another way to deal with raising and rearing a child, they now only have that information to say, like, here, I'm giving this to you, not just for you to be well, but for you to pass on. And if that information isn't a holistic approach or a healthy approach, then they're just, passing it along. And I feel like it's the same way generationally. If there's, like what Natasha was saying, someone who might be dealing with an addiction, and we watch them go through this addiction, we watch them deal with it, and no one says anything, whether it's a mother or a grandfather, a grandmother or a grandfather. For as men, we kind of pass our seeds often, and not a lot of genetic information is stored. But if you're,
I don't mean to let it.
No, it's cool. I'm trying to say it in the most holistic way possible. Yeah. But imagine if I'm eating a certain way, that food is giving my reproductive energy and my reproductive genetic makeup information. That whatever I'm watching, is giving my body an emotional response, and that is being transferred to my seed. So if I am constantly in that state of being, then all I'm doing is creating a genetic code in myself. So when I pass that seed off to my queen, she's going to have what I'm giving her to work with, and then within her, if she doesn't have control over the things that she's dealing with, or still dealing with that trauma. All of that information is mixed in together, and we're born with whatever is, passed down. So I would agree. I would say it's both as well.
We can go back and forth.
Yes.
Okay, cool. One thing that I thought was interesting, and I'll explain the chicken wing. And hearing y'all talk about trauma and how it could engulf a bunch of different things that could. Well, I think I was relating, or I was coming to realize, like, how connected I am to my father and my biological father, and how stuff transpired. And then I saw how easy our traumas transpired. Mm-hmm. So when I met my father at like the age of 9 or 10 or whatever, when we started hanging out, one thing that I always done, chicken wing flats, there's 2 bones. Yeah. Even before I met my father, this was mind blowing. I would stick the whole chicken wing into the flat into one side of my cheek, and I'd bite that side of the chicken wing, and then I'd turn it around, or I'd twist it a little bit and pull the bones out so that there's just that whole meat, and I'd pull the whole bone out. And I met my dad, and I'm not even paying attention. I'm eating the chicken wings, and my uncle, his brother, comes over, and he's like, "Yo, y'all look alike, y'all act alike, y'all even eat chicken wings the same." And I'm look up, and he's just like pulling the joint out his mouth, like wow. That was like what he did naturally. Yeah. And we have a lot of things that like that's not unhealthy necessarily. That's right. Like innovative. And, but I realized that that's like who we are as people, like kind of innovative people. But there's also a lot of like negative things that transpire between us in our DNA that might have come from trauma, or just like who we are in our DNA that aren't so like neutral or whatever, or innovative, just like negative, if you will. But because of that, that brings me to my main question. Because of that, do you feel like the wounded, the abused, the trauma-induced are suitable to teach our young? Because I think trauma can be subjective. And, somebody could be like, yo, that chicken wing thing's terrible. You know what I'm saying? It's not okay. It's a bad thing. Some people could be like, that's genius, And you were talking specifically, Jalil, about how you can take certain things from like your situation or your trauma. Like some people could look at my trauma and be like, oh, this is beating me up, I can't move forward. Some people could be like, oh, this is positives of my trauma and how I got to where I am now, and this is negatives of my trauma, things that I need to work on. And I think in that there's a very unique situation, can become a very unique person. And it's like, can kids are young like be trusted to be able to pick apart? Because I know me as a youth at whatever age, I was always like, I'd see the bad in someone, a terrible person, and I'd also make sure that I see the good in them, and I'd soak that up. And in doing so, I might also soak up some negatives, but I was always reaching for what I could grasp from the situation. Do you guys feel like it or just, I'd love to hear y'all touch on like how y'all feel about the wounded, the abused, the trauma-induced teaching our young?
Yeah, if I could just kind of start on that, and I'll make it quick because I'm in a season right now where I've been heavily reflective of, I was mentioning earlier, my time working in schools and having 5 years of working, 4 because it's high school.
This man was working everywhere, bro.
Everywhere, bro, isn't it?
That's my team, man.
So I had a chance to see some young brothers like in the 9th grade who was in it. They were in their trauma, whatever that trauma was, and I ain't gonna put them out there, but they were dealing with some stuff, whether it was them perpetrating it or them being a victim of it. And I was able to see them from 9th grade with the program that we had where we were in the schools every day, and this is a unique opportunity that not everyone has, but we were able to like create what's called a rite of passage experience for them, where we just kind of expressed to them like, yo, trauma is going to happen. It's going to happen for anyone, and it can happen anywhere. And sometimes you can control it. Sometimes you can create a situation where the trauma happens to wake somebody up and to put them into the next phase of their journey, which would be, that once you start to see that trauma, you go into a phase where it's like, all right, well, what do I do? And then you go on to figure out what to do. So I'm saying all this to say, I feel that like the wounded divine being is always on their journey. They're always learning, and you can heal from 20 different traumas and be like, yo, I'm on top of the world, I feel great. And then tomorrow something comes up. Yeah. And something comes up and it's like, damn, I didn't even realize I was dealing with that. I didn't think that from my childhood, being separated from my mom and going to school or, getting health care in a certain way would show up in my life in this way. But I still have to be ready to show up. But I think, like I'm saying, with that opportunity to like talk about rite of passage journeys, we were able to say like, yo, your journey is not going to end once you make it to the celebration of it all. Once you heal from your trauma, you're going to keep on going through something. As long as you're on ghetto planet Earth, you're going to go through something, and it's not always going to be you or what you're feeling from your family. It might be what's going on right outside your door. And the information that you learn from healing from that trauma, you now turn it into a tool.
Off of that, this is like a add-on to that question. I don't know how to word this, but like it's pretty much the same. Like, do you think that people are able to recognize themselves after trauma, or do you think that okay, it's not like recognizing yourself, but it's pretty much changing as a result of trauma versus changing for the better and then like being a different person, like yourself?
Nipsey said it best. He was like, you closer to where you're going than you would be if you stopped and turned around. And that's what I was trying to explain to them. Yeah. So I think it's hard, but if we're capable to recognize, I think it's very, very hard. Some probably can, some probably can't, but I do just want to pinpoint how hard that shit actually is.
I'll say I want to agree with you on that. One of the things, I've been through a trauma, and the trauma changed my personality in a dramatic way that I didn't realize was happening. So I started kind of like isolating and being avoidant. I started getting very like socially anxious and being anxious about social experiences. So like usually, or prior to this, I was like enjoying going out, having fun, going to parties, showing up, being places, doing all of this stuff, and not giving a care in the world about like, you know, what's gonna happen, how, anything. But at some point I went through trauma, and I was invited places, and I'd say I would go and I wouldn't go. I would say to my friends I was gonna go, and I would like not pick up the phone when they called to come get me or something like that. And I was really not wanting to go out at all.
The introverts over there, like.
Yeah. And I was really it was a huge change in how I was. And I just didn't think about it being a trauma response. I'm just thinking like, I just don't want to go out with nobody no more. I don't want to do this no more. That's just all. But later I was reading about trauma. I was in college, and I'm reading about trauma responses, and I'm like, oh, snap.
Not me.
And went through the list, and I'm like, dang, this is exactly what I've been doing in response to a specific trauma that I'd experienced. So I think we don't always recognize when we're having a trauma response, but with education and, you know, making sure that people are informed about trauma and trauma responses and how to cope and deal when we have these conversations and we have these educational experiences, people are able to better become reflective and understand what's happening with them. Because without it, we're just moving like unconscious of what's going on. And I think the more we raise the consciousness by educating ourselves and others, we're able to kind of like identify those changes.
But one question that I had,
We gonna take two more questions.
Nah, yeah, for sure. They giving us the look.
It's been a long day.
Sleep. How important is it to the woman? Just like that.
Sleep.
I'm gonna step out on this.
Listen, sleep is important for everybody. And I think sometimes people take sleep for granted, and it's just like we in this hustle mentality, hustle culture, and it's just kind of like, oh yeah, I'm gonna just work because I need to. I gotta stay up, sleep. I ain't sleeping until I'm dead. Blah blah blah. But really, your brain and your body start to break down if you do not get adequate sleep. So that's just I feel like we don't even have to expound on that.
Yeah.
Well, I there is something that I do want to mention, because I don't be sleeping all the time.
Hey,
But
before you go, I wanted to say this. I used to, because you was talking about this whole hustle,
mentality.
the hustle
Yeah.
mentality, and I used to think it was cool at first, and now I'm stuck in it. And I don't think it's as cool as it's not cool
It's
at all.
not fun at all.
I used to be like, shorty, Seem don't go to sleep, Seem fall asleep. I can't. The way you put your pajamas on and you get ready for bed. Hey, I'm just working till my body just drop. And I'm like, that is your body like flatlining low key. You're not preparing to go to bed. And I think this is important when it comes to us as human beings, because there was a study done. We are the only animals in the world that avoid sleep. Any animal, when sleep is felt, they go to sleep. They can be in like a fleet of danger. Whenever they like, oh, I'm tired and it's time to go to bed, they're gonna go right to bed. And we're the only ones that's like, I gotta finish this essay, I gotta do this, I gotta watch this last episode. I just wanted to say that. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
That's a couple episodes. I've been so I'm, and this is me. I always, like, if I'm doing something, I'm always going to share with people and say, hey, you can try this too. But I'm vegan, right? And one thing that I've found in like me changing my diet in relation to sleep was like, the more that I like took time out to fast, and the more that I like started to like really observe what I was putting in, it started to kind of automatically change my relationship to like feeling sleepy. But as I'm an older individual than I was when I first started my vegan journey, I am realizing that you need sleep. You gotta sleep. But also when you take into account everything else that your body is doing, and like the food that you're putting in your body and what it does to you, you know, metabolically, your body is going to be working to break down that food. Your body is going to be working while you're grinding to like, I need to, and your organs are working, you know, depending on what other things you're putting in your body, it's working to break down that food, that drink, that, you know, pill, that herb, and turn it into something else. And that's hard work on your lungs, it's hard work on your liver, it's hard work on your stomach, it's hard work, and your gut is the brain of your body. So if your brain is overworked, then you're gonna need a lot more sleep. You know, if this brain is overworked, you're gonna need a lot more sleep. But if you are a little bit more conscious of like, yo, anything that I'm putting in, it has to be adding to me having energy, and also how much of it I'm putting in. So taking a break from eating to like allow your body to, I'm gonna chill for a little bit. Even though you moving, like you can sit down and relax and meditate and breathe, which will give you other types of energy. But in relation to like stress and dealing with trauma, like I feel like sleep should always be a go-to because it does give you a chance to reset. But if you are like being conscious of other things and going on with your body, you know, it will allow you to, at least for me and some of my experiences, you can go a little bit longer without requiring sleep, depending on what the activity is. Because, and this is for another podcast and another day, maybe for my therapist, when I find you out there, I've had some situations where I wasn't putting the right things in my body and I wasn't getting enough sleep and I'm behind the wheel, and that's dangerous. You know what I mean? So it's necessary.
You can take the last one away.
Okay. Let me know if this one makes sense. Do you think that there are differences in the way that trauma shows through the divine feminine and the divine masculine?
Yeah, definitely. And we talked about this lightly.
That was ready. It was like,
You brought us back. So
gonna
talk about this. No.
Yeah, so for instance, let's talk about one trauma that a lot of people experience can be abuse, which can be like a physical abuse. And a lot of the time, women or feminine people who experience abuse, like I said, turn inward, feel depressed, and their like feelings of self-worth and like how they experience the world. Like they feel like they're not worthy. They have dealing with low self-esteem, and they're just kind of like getting in that victim, like, you know, getting in that victim mentality. But it gets worse and worse, and it just turns inward. And so it's like somebody said to me before that depression is anger turned inward. So when a lot of people experience abuse, a lot of times masculine and feminine people experience abuse and feel anger and sadness. And when they feel anger and sadness, it can like kind of like, you know, branch off into different responses. So sometimes when like feminine people are feeling angry, they blame, and when they are feeling powerless against their abuser, they say, well, I can't blame the abuser because nothing's going to happen, so I'm going to blame myself. And whereas like masculine people, sometimes when they're feeling angry and they want to blame somebody, they want to make somebody pay. You know what I'm saying? They're trying to.
You won't catch this blame.
So it's the anger and aggression that goes outward instead of inward. Right. So I feel like, you know, and that speaks to the yin and the yang of the masculine and feminine, because feminine is receptive, and so that means everything comes this way, and the masculine is, you know, it moves outward. So that's that doing, and that's sending that energy outward. So, you know, and if you think on the physical level, we're thinking about the genitalia of the masculine and feminine, like, you know, what does a phallus look like? Looks, you know, sends energy outward. What does the uterus look like? It accepts the energy inward. So that's, the giving and the receiving, I feel like that is how it shows up differently. So how, when we're thinking of all of these responses to trauma, what does it look like when those responses are going inward? What does it look like when those responses are going outward?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that really sums it up. Because the one thing we spoke about in the first part, in part one, was when you look at both the attributes of the divine masculine and the divine feminine, you can kind of see how they balance each other out. And in the same token, when you look at the characteristics of the divine wounded, or the wounded divine being, it's the same thing. So, like Natasha was saying, that pushing out that energy forcefully, not in a healthy way for the divine masculine, and then that going inward and, kind of like putting all that anger and blame on oneself and the divine feminine. I think that covers all of those traits that we spoke about. Yeah. I also, one thing I'm realizing in my journey personally, because I like to get a little personal too, is that when that trauma shows up in the divine being, I think it can be a little, what's the word I'm looking for? I guess to make it simple, it can be scary, right? So we're on our journey, we're feeling good. I think I was saying earlier, we get healed from all those, 20 traumas, and now boom, here's another one. And the scary part can be like, I've healed and I've expressed to multiple people that I've healed, or I've put out there that, hey, you can get your healing too. And now I'm dealing with something that causes me to feel, those negative traits coming up, those characteristics come up, and I'm challenged on whether, how do I continue my journey? How do I continue to be divine? And overcoming that fear is I feel like the next part of the journey. So it kind of shows up with a new challenge and a new task on your path to becoming that divine and continuing to be that divine, which we know it's not like you're divine, you're perfect. It's like, you're divine, you're aware. You're aware. So continue to be aware, because as long as you are aware, you have room to work on it. Tosh can tell you, and I'm sure as these podcasts go on and we get more personal, I am becoming more and more aware all the time. And we used to have disagreements in the past where that thing would go on for days, and it would be like, it's Tosh to me. But, now one thing that I've been working on is in that moment, what tools did we already talk about? What tools did you share with me? What tools did I research, and how can I utilize it? And it can blow your mind sometimes to the point where it's like, are you being sarcastic right now?
Mm-hmm. I feel that.
No? All right, cool. Well, let's move forward then. So yeah, I would agree, and I think it does show up in certain ways, especially that way, at least from what I've seen. Mm-hmm.
So, all right, well, thank you everybody for joining Liberated Akashic Liberated Community series. Today was part two of a three-part series that we have going on here, talking about divine feminine and divine masculine. And today we talked a little bit about trauma. If you are experiencing trauma, if you are aware of your traumas or unaware of your traumas, make sure that you are utilizing the tools that you have around you. Make sure that you're tapping in, checking in with yourself, and making sure that you are able to identify your feelings and your emotions. And if you are not, make sure that you reach out to your therapist. Make sure you have that person on your team. Reach out to your community. Make sure that you're reaching out to people that are going to hold you accountable. And make sure that you are reaching out to people who know you completely. And when I say know you completely, people that you feel like have a good view of who you are as a person, so that they can give you a righteous view of yourself whenever you're getting that information about that, or whatever you think they're seeing in you. And lastly, utilize your tools, whether that's listening to your affirmations, burning your sage, taking your bath, utilize those tools, utilize those resources, and continue learning and educating yourself. Thank
I
you,
only have a
everybody.
shower in my apartment. I need to get a bathtub.
We got some things coming down the
Yeah.
pike, and I'm not gonna say it. I'll
We
talk to you
gonna
about
talk
it.
more about it,
And
but
we'll talk about it here too.
we gonna make everything more accessible.
Yes.
That's the plan. That's the goal. Okay. So last time I was singing a little bit of a song to close everything out. I would like to sing a little bit more today.
Please do. Please do.
Okay. I was gonna sing the Sage Wind song.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. You ready?
Sure.
All right. Breathe in. Breathe out. Inhale and exhale the things that hold you down. I'm smudging you right now. Let the smoke float around
Until
your spirit settles down and the smoke clears. Thank you. One more time. Breathe in. Breathe out. Inhale and exhale the things that hold you down. I'm smudging you right now. Let the smoke float around until your spirit settles down and the smoke clears. That's it.
That's crazy.
Yo, peace and love, divine. You are
Always.
divine and you're not alone. Tap in.
Bye-bye. Alright, we good, yeah.
I was done. Another joint in the books, man.
Another one. Another.
We operated from the liberated Akashic. We operated from the liberated Akashic. We operated from the liberated Akashic.
So that we been liberated, my soul has been dedicated to the greatness, elevate, illuminate the vacant spaces, new foundation. I've been growing steady with anticipation. No more waiting, moving adjacent straight to my destination. Knowledge rooted in the records of Akashic. Gods and goddesses connected to the cosmic. Remember who you are the key to any topic. Profit, let your soul go, they can't stop it. Manifesting anything, it ain't no object. Meditate, set your ritual and then lock it into place and incubate like hot pocket. So you're in a space and blast off like Team Rocket. It's a clean optic, that third eye it beam logic. Complimentary to the crown, the queen rocking DNA, the spiral staircase, divine microscopic. Vibrational frequencies, harmonics is hypnotic.
Liberated Akashic. We operated from the liberated Akashic. We operated from the liberated Akashic.
I'm 34 years old.
We operated from the liberated
I'm
Akashic.
34 years old. I'm 34 years old. I'm 34 years old. You add them together, the 3 and 4, I'm really 7 now.
Oh,
Divine.
all right,
Mathematics.
everyone. Happy birthday. We may enjoy the
Thank you.
cake.
Yes. Yes. Thank you,
What?
everybody.